the fixation on Jerusalem led to our Zionism. It led to American Zionism. That American Zionism led to things like the Iraq War. That led to a forever war in the Middle East. That led to the rise of ISIS. That led to butchery in Iraq. That butchery boiled over into Syria. That butchery ended up being in Syria for over a decade. Tons of people killed. Hundreds of thousands of people killed in Syria because instability in Iraq boiled over into Syria. It's a curse. And we have Israelis who are disturbed by all of this because Israel has become so evil and so filled with madness that you even have Israelis who are disturbed by Israel. Even Israelis are disturbed by Israel. There was an article that was published by Haaretz talking about how Israeli soldiers opened fire on Palestinians as they were simply trying to get food at aid distribution centers. Netanyahu condemned the article, called it blood libel, and then the defense minister of Israel, Mr. Israel Katz, condemned the article, and then you had all these Hasperists or Israeli propagandists coming out saying that the article was just one big fat lie. But really, what was the source of the article? What was the source? The source was Israelis. Israeli soldiers. Israeli soldiers who are always hailed as heroes by the Israeli Hasperists, by the Israeli propagandists. Israeli soldiers who are hailed as valiant warriors by the pro-Israel Christians and by the pro-Israel secularists. Right? Israeli soldiers are the source for the article. It was Israeli soldiers who came out and said, yes, these atrocities happened. Yes, we were told to open fire on Palestinians who were unarmed, people who were no threat to us. We were told to shoot at these people at these aid distribution centers. Yes, these things happened. The source for the article is Israeli soldiers. Why? Why did these Israeli soldiers come out and say that these atrocities happened? Why did these Israeli soldiers feel the need to go to Haaretz and say, yes, these things happened? Why? Because they were disturbed. And what does this tell us? It tells us that even Israelis are disturbed by Israel. And Haaretz did a follow-up article to explain some of the background of the article about the atrocities at these aid distribution centers. And this follow-up article talks about how one of the authors of the article, Mr. Nir Hasson, talked about why these soldiers came to him to recount these atrocities. And this article says that the soldiers' motivation were twofold. First, the moral issue of being put in the position to use deadly force to stop hungry people trying to get some food for their family disturbed them. Even Israelis are disturbed by Israel. You even have Israeli soldiers who are disturbed by what Israel is doing. So when I come out, and this is what I have difficulty understanding, okay? I have difficulty understanding why people get agitated at me or they get frustrated with me when I am exposing Israeli war crimes. The reason why I expose Israeli war crimes is because they are disturbing. It's because for decades, people in America have been told that Israel has the most moral army in the world, that Israel has to be absolutely defended because Israel was created by God, and the people in Israel, except for the Arabs and the non-Jews, are God's chosen people, and so you have to defend them no matter what. And so what that does, what that ideology does, is it gets people to think, well, we have to defend Israel no matter what. No matter what, we have to defend Israel. And so when you have information coming out exposing Israeli atrocities, then the pro-Israel people feel the need to defend Israel and just deny that these atrocities ever happened. And then when you have an article saying, listen, these atrocities are happening, here is the source. The source is a bunch of disturbed Israeli soldiers. And these Israeli soldiers are saying, listen, we're disturbed. It's not just a bunch of non-Jewish people who are talking about this. You have Israelis talking about this stuff, saying we're disturbed by what we see. And these soldiers have seen it firsthand. These soldiers, they've seen it firsthand, and they're trying to tell the world this is happening. And what is the response of the pro-Israel people? What is the response of the Zionists and the pro-Israel lobby types? The response is to simply deny that these things are happening. That's the response. It's and I talked about this in my last video. It's just like Holocaust denialism. When the Holocaust was happening, you had people denying that it was happening. You had people saying while it was happening, oh, it's not happening. The stories are all lies. It's all a bunch of garbage, etc., etc. The Germans would never do that. Germany is a super civilized, innovative country. The Germans would never do that. And you had all these racists in the United States saying, well, the German race is superior. The Germans would never do that. And what do you have today? You have people saying, well, no, the Jews are God's chosen people. Jewish people would never do that. And you even have Christians participating in this denialism, in this denial of atrocities. The Christian Broadcasting Network, CBN, did they did an episode on these shootings happening at these aid distribution centers, and they brought some guy, I forgot his name, Shimon Myers, I think his name is. And this Shimon Myers guy, whatever his name is, Mr. Shimon, he comes out and he says, yeah, we don't even know if these victims even exist.
It seems like almost every single day, unarmed Palestinian civilians are being killed trying to get aid at distribution centers. So who is doing the killing? Well, honestly, it depends on which site you read. Well, Shimon Myers, CEO of Arise, joins me now. Shimon, what say you?
Here's what we know. Hamas is not concerned with humanitarian causes in Gaza. Can we agree on that? Israel and the United States are concerned with civilian humanitarian causes in Gaza. So we don't even actually know where these casualties are coming from or if they even exist.
Could you imagine during the Holocaust someone saying, yeah, we don't even know if these Jewish victims even exist? And guess what? You can imagine it, because that's what happened during the Holocaust. You had people denying that the Holocaust was even happening. And today you have atrocities and you have people denying that they're happening. And you have evangelical Christians participating in this denialism, and you have these fanatical Zionists participating in this denialism. And the thing is, you could say, well, Ted, maybe these people are just naive. Okay, fine, right? I was once a super pro-Israel guy. I used to debate people in high school about Israel, all right? I was a very pro-Israel guy. I was raised to be a Zionist. I was raised in Zionism. My father was a major influencer, a major figure in the Zionist cause in the United States for many, many years. I was raised in Zionism. I'm not exaggerating when I say this, guys. I was raised on Hava Lalira Hava, or whatever the Yiddish song is, right? I'm not joking when I say this. I was raised to be pro-Israel. And when October the 7th happened, I was like, listen, guys, Israel has a right to defend itself, etc., etc. And I will still hold on to the position that, yes, October the 7th was an atrocity. I'm not denying that. Listen, I don't believe in denying atrocities. And so, therefore, I'm not going to deny October the 7th, because we have to be good faith. And in being good faith, we have to acknowledge all atrocities. We have to acknowledge that an atrocity is an atrocity. October the 7th was an atrocity. And therefore, by that standard, we also have to acknowledge that atrocities are happening in Gaza. And I was raised to be pro-Israel. I was raised in Zionism. And after a while, and at first I was thinking, no, Israel's leading a righteous war. Israel's doing a righteous war. This is a righteous war. Hamas is evil, blah, blah, blah. And Hamas is evil. Don't get me wrong. They are a terrorist group. I don't support Hamas. But just because I don't support Hamas doesn't mean that I have to support Israeli atrocities. There is just so much... There's so much extremism on both sides. I think most people turn to extremism on either side. I think most people turn to extremism. And you have people who are so pro-Israel that they will defend Israel to a fault. and they will actively deny evils that Israel does and has done. And as this war has gone on, I've been reading about these atrocities, and at first I was saying Israel's doing the right thing, and you can see my old videos if you don't believe me, and I'm not going to delete those videos. I'm not going to delete those videos because I want to prove a point, and the point is that Israel is losing people. Israel is losing people, and it continues to lose people because of stuff like this. And even I, someone raised in Zionism, looked at these stories and looked at all this information about Israeli war crimes, Israeli snipers killing civilians, Israeli soldiers forcing Palestinians to be human bomb detectors, human shields for bombs. And then you have this, the massacres at these aid distribution centers. And I've looked at all of these stories and all of the information, and I have just come to the conclusion, oh my God, this whole thing is just evil. Israel is doing war crimes. Israel is doing atrocities. And it's not as if I was completely oblivious to this stuff before. I knew about Sabra and Shatila for years. And over the years, as I've been looking at Israel and Israel's actions and looking into Israel's history, I have grown to become very disillusioned with Israel over the years. And I have gotten deeper in my disillusionment, because when October the 7th happened and the war began, I said, okay, Israel's doing a righteous war. And then you come to the realization that it's not a righteous war. This is not a righteous war. The October the 7th atrocity has been used as a pretext to do atrocities. Now, so I'm deeper in the state of disillusionment, and I will continue to be disillusioned. Well, actually, no, I'm completely disillusioned with Israel. I do not support Israel. In fact, I regret supporting Israel in the past. It's a curse. I've come to the conclusion. There is a curse that's going on. A curse. Now you may ask, well, Ted, what do you mean by curse? It's a curse. Why is there a curse? Because in this land that we call Israel, there is this cult of Jerusalem. And in this cult of Jerusalem, the city of Jerusalem is everything. This is why the Zionists have been so obsessed with this idea of Jerusalem being the capital of Israel and not Tel Aviv. And Donald Trump said Jerusalem is the capital of Israel, and all the Zionists just lost their minds, and they became utterly ecstatic over it, because this is their dream, right? They revere the city of Jerusalem. And anytime you have a group of people fixated on the city of Jerusalem, there is a curse. There's a curse. The evangelicals are obsessed with Jerusalem. The Muslims are obsessed with Jerusalem. The Jews are obsessed with Jerusalem. For a while, the Catholics were obsessed with Jerusalem, but the whole disaster of the Crusades made them learn their lesson, and that's why you don't see the Catholic Church talking about Jerusalem anymore, liberating Jerusalem and all that stuff, because the Crusades were such a huge mess up. But you have the evangelicals obsessed with Jerusalem. Why? Because, it says in the Bible, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, if I forget thee, may my right hand be cut off. But then Paul, and these are evangelicals, so I'm a Christian, evangelicals claim Christianity, so I have a right to speak on this issue. I'm starting to sound like Tucker Carlson when he was arguing with Ted Cruz. You're bringing up scripture. I'm a Christian. I feel like I have a right to respond here. Tucker Carlson has such a funny cadence to him. But anyway, I have a right to respond to this, right, as a Christian. Paul talks about heavenly Jerusalem. He talks about the Jerusalem on high. And he says that we are surrounded by a heavenly host. We're surrounded by the saints. We're surrounded by saints like Gideon and Elijah, etc. We're surrounded by prophets. We're surrounded by angels. We are in the presence of God. We are with the Jerusalem in heaven. So of course, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, if I forget thee, the Jerusalem in heaven, may my right hand be cut off. St. John talks about earthly Jerusalem in the book of Revelation. And what does he say? He says, Jerusalem? That's Sodom and Egypt. Jerusalem? You mean the city where our Lord was crucified? That's Sodom and Egypt. And what does Jesus say about Jerusalem? Jerusalem, if only you had followed me like little baby chicks go under their mother's wing to protect themselves from the rain. But no, Jerusalem, you have chosen wickedness. And Jesus is in Judea, and his disciples are saying, Jesus, look at this beautiful temple, the temple in Jerusalem. Look at this beautiful temple. And Jesus says, yeah, this temple, it's all going to come down. Not one stone of this edifice will stand. It's all going to come down. Really? Yeah. And what does Jesus say in the gospel? What does he tell the Pharisees? Something greater than the temple is here. Something greater than the temple is here. And what was he talking about by any chance? He was talking about himself. Jesus is saying, I'm greater than the temple because I'm the fulfillment of the temple. The temple, the physical temple, was simply a foreshadower of its fulfillment. And the evangelicals, I call them evangelicucks for humor's sake. We'll call them evangelicals because that's their proper title. That's what they call themselves. The evangelicals will sit there and talk about a temple and a third temple, but they're really fixated on the foreshadower of the fulfillment. The fulfillment is Christ. So they're ignoring the fulfillment, and they want to fixate themselves on the foreshadower. What? This is absolutely antithetical to Christianity. And you have, oh my God, you have these evangelicals. Oh, Jesus, have mercy on me. They said, listen, God demands in the Old Testament, he demands, all right, red heifers that are unblemished to be sacrificed in the temple. So, listen, we can't find that in nature, right? So apparently God is not giving us the red heifers because we can't find it in nature, so we're going to have to force the issue on God. Kind of like how Israel tried to force America into a war with Iran by bombing Iran. Oh, that was a disaster. Israel got bombed and started to look like Gaza. That's another issue. So these lunatics said, okay, well, we're going to breed some red heifers in Texas. So they got some heretic in Texas to breed some red heifers. And so now they're in Israel, and you have these evangelicals talking about a third temple in Jerusalem. And so what is this, right? This is a fixation on Jerusalem. And why do they want to build a temple? Why do they want a red heifer? Because they want to cause violence. The evangelicals know that if you begin to build a temple and you begin to sacrifice animals on the Temple Mount, in the same area where you have the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the second holiest mosque in Islam, the Muslims are going to become violent. You're going to have violence. You're going to have sectarian violence between the Jews and the Muslims. And the evangelicals expect to just sit by the sidelines and go, another episode of Semitic wars. And they believe that by causing all this violence in Israel, that Jesus is going to come down. Now, let me just give you guys one thought on this, and then I'll continue on with the rest of my thoughts. And this is just a side note, and I've said this before, but it is quite pertinent to the discussion. This is just voodooism. Evangelicals say, oh, we're Christian, but you can't be a Christian and believe in this idea of building a third temple when Christ said, I am the temple. And these evangelicals are always talking about, oh, it's our focus is on Jesus. It's Jesus plus nothing. Jesus plus nothing. But yet they want to build a temple, and they go antithetical to what Christ said, in which he said that I am the temple. So Christ said I'm the temple. They want to build a temple. It's anti-Christ. These people who want to do this are anti-Christ. But secondly, this idea of causing violence in order to usher in Christ's coming, this is voodoo. Voodoo is when you take a chicken and you slit the chicken's throat and you say, okay, I summon the spirits to do something, and you basically are doing voodoo in order to coerce the spirits to abide by your will and to do your will. That's voodooism. And so these evangelicals are saying, well, we got to kill a red heifer at the Temple Mount, and what that's going to do, it's going to cause Muslims and Jews to slaughter each other. So it's worse than voodoo. At least the voodooists, they just kill a chicken. We kill chickens every day when we have KFC or we have Chick-fil-A. Well, I don't like Chick-fil-A, but we kill billions of chickens every single day. These crazy evangelicals, they want people to kill each other. And by that violence, by stirring up that violence, by that violence actually transpiring, Christ is going to come down.
And you wrote a paper called A Christian Response to the Third Temple. And in it, you answer the questions that many Christians are asking. Okay, so why do we want to build a third temple if the next temple, according to Christian eschatology, is the tribulation temple, which the beast desecrates?
Yeah.
And it startles a lot of people because, such as Zechariah 13:8, you hear of the conclusion of this time of Jacob's trouble. The last 3.5 years of the tribulation is that 2/3 of the population of Israel perish. And so they're like, well, does this hasten the destruction of the Jewish people by building a third temple? What would you say to that?
So what I say to that is, the question we need to ask is, do we want the Messiah to come?
Yes.
Because he's not going to come without that happening. So to work towards seeing him come is what our Jewish fathers in the faith want to do. They want to see the Messiah come. And we should all want the Messiah to come. And until God's temple is there, then he can't come. Now the Antichrist, he does come, but his time is short. You know, we talk about 2/3 of the population. I read that as 2/3 of the Earth's population. It's going to be a really hard time. And when we see that, it is going to be a horrible and hard time that comes upon the earth. But it's going to happen. And I really am ready to see a step up. The world is getting
Pretty hairy.
bad situation.
Yes,
you know, we have countries that are talking about nuclear war.
I know.
And it's going to be some of that's what's going to cause that for the world. So we need the Messiah to come, and this is the step towards that, is build the temple, God's temple, so that can happen.
So how is this different from some voodooist in Jamaica somewhere saying, I killed that chicken? All right, Jamaica, man, I killed that chicken. I summoned the spirits. How is that different from, oh, we're going to have Muslims and Jews kill each other so Jesus can come? Well, I mean, they're both evil, right? But I think the evangelical fantasy is worse. Because like I said, the voodooist people, they're sick. They believe in a demonic religion, but they're just killing a chicken. These people want people to kill each other to summon Jesus. And they don't even believe in Jesus, these people. They believe in a demon they call Jesus. It's what Paul said in Galatians when he spoke of people following a false Christ. So you have that, right? So this is a fixation on Jerusalem. All this craziness, right? This crazy idea, this is not even crazy, this demented, deranged idea, it stems from what? A fixation on Jerusalem. The Muslims also fixate on Jerusalem. They say, oh, Al-Aqsa Mosque, and Muhammad, he got on a Buraq, which is kind of like Aladdin's flying carpet, and he flew all the way to Jerusalem. And because Muhammad flew to Jerusalem, the Al-Aqsa Mosque is the second holiest mosque in Islam, so it's right after the Kaaba. And so we have to fight for Jerusalem. And the Muslims invaded Jerusalem, and they killed a bunch of people, they slaughtered Christians. And where does this violence come from, right? Where does this derangement, this deranged behavior come from? It comes from a fixation on Jerusalem. And then you have the Jews, and you have these extremist Jews who are obsessed with a temple. And, you know, when Israel was first established as a country, the idea of building a third temple was pretty much unheard of. And maybe there were some extremists here and there, and if there were any, they were a very small number. But, you know, the initial decision, or really the decision of the Jews in Israel when Israel was a brand new country, was to simply give the Temple Mount to the Arabs. And the reason why the Jews decided to give the Temple Mount to the Arabs was because they said, listen, Israel is going to be a secular country. We're not here to create a Jewish theocracy. We are not here to create a Jewish utopia. We are here to create a Zionist, secular Jewish state. And so therefore, we're not going to fixate ourselves on a temple. And you know what? Even though those guys were atheists, you know, they were influenced by Soviet culture, because a lot of Jewish people came from the Soviet Union. Even though they were atheists, I think that they were more level-headed than these crazy hardliners who want to build the third temple, because they said, listen, what's the point of causing all this sectarian violence? Just give it to the Arabs. We're done. But now you have all these hardliners. And what these hardline Jews want to do is, like I said, they want to build a temple. And they want to sacrifice goats on the temple, at the temple. In fact, they even want to go so far as to sacrifice goats at the they want to sacrifice goats next to the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And they want to do this to provoke the Muslims, right? This is very obvious. In fact, every year, Israeli authorities have to stop Jewish extremists from trying to smuggle goats into the Temple Mount, because these extremists want to sacrifice goats on the Temple Mount, and the Israeli government knows that if you allow this, it's going to cause a whole bunch of chaos. So the Israeli government tries to maintain the status quo, and the Israeli authorities will stop these extremists from smuggling in the goats. But where does this come from, right? This desire to create the Beit HaMikdash, the third temple.
אנחנו לא חוששים מניצחון. בואו ניתן כוח ללוחמינו האמיצים והגיבורים. האם אנחנו מפחדים מניצחון? הם לא שמעו מכאן עד עזה. האם אנחנו מפחדים מניצחון? האם אנחנו מפחדים מהמילה כיבוש? אנחנו כובשים את ארץ ישראל. אנחנו משחררים את עזה. אנחנו מיישבים את עזה. אנחנו מנצחים את האויב. אנחנו אומרים תודה לקדוש ברוך הוא. אנחנו מבקשים ממנו עוד. לא מספיק. אנחנו מבקשים ממנו עוד. עוד יותר טוב בעזרת השם. מתוך אחדות ירושלים, מתוך קדושת ירושלים, מתוך שמחת ירושלים, נזכה בעזרת השם להרחבת גבולות ארץ ישראל, לגאולה שלמה ולבניין בית המקדש כאן במהרה בימינו, אמן.
Well, it comes from this fixation on Jerusalem, because they're still fixated on earthly Jerusalem. They never got the memo. Well, they got the memo, but they rejected the memo, right? They got the memo that the Messiah already came, the fulfillment of the temple already came, but they rejected the memo. They tore it up. So they don't care about the memo. They want to focus on earthly Jerusalem. And so because they focus on earthly Jerusalem, you have violence, right? Violence between Arabs and Jews. Between Muslims and Jews, I should say, because not all Arabs are Muslim. There's plenty of Arabs who are Christian. And it reminds me of the obsession with Jerusalem that the Catholic Church had. Back in the Middle Ages, the Catholic Church had a huge fixation on Jerusalem, and it was almost Zionistic. You know, it was almost like Zionism. The Catholic Church back in the medieval period taught that Jerusalem belonged to the Catholics because the Catholic Church was the true Israel. It was the spiritual Israel. And so therefore, Jerusalem belonged to the Catholics. Now, the Catholic Church in this case was partially right. They were right in the sense that, yes, Christendom is the true Israel because it's spiritual Israel. But there's that key word, spiritual, right? Because the church is spiritual Israel, then that means our focus is not on physical Israel. It's on spiritual Israel. Therefore, our focus is on heavenly Jerusalem, not on earthly Jerusalem. But the Catholics, they also tore up the memo. I mean, they got the memo. They were told, hey, listen, we're spiritual Israel. But they tore the memo up. And so they became Zionistic. They said, well, we're going to go to Israel and we're going to make it our land and it's our land, etc., etc. So they went over to Israel. And what happened? The Crusaders butchered a bunch of Jewish people and they butchered a bunch of Muslim people and they did atrocities. They did horrendous violence to Muslim people. And there was a Catholic writer, his name was Ralph of Cayenne, and he wrote a book on the First Crusade. And if you want to get an idea of how disturbing the First Crusade was, read that book. I read that book many years ago, the record written by Ralph of Cayenne, and I read it about, I would say definitely over 10 years ago. I read it probably in 2013 or 14. And I was reading the book, and he talks about the atrocities. And he doesn't say, oh, listen. Ralph of Cayenne isn't saying, hey, listen, we did atrocities. It was terrible. It was terrible what we did. It was very unchristian. It was completely antithetical to Christianity. No. Ralph of Cayenne is praising the atrocities. Ralph of Cayenne is relishing in the atrocities. He loves it. He loves the atrocities. He's praising them. He's talking about how wonderful they were. And he talks about how the Crusades did this massacre in Jerusalem and how the Muslim population was butchered. And he says that even elderly people were slaughtered. And and this is the part that really made me think, oh my God, what the hell am I supporting here? Because I used to write in support of the Crusades. He talks about how a bunch of Muslim people, even elderly people, were offering money to the Crusades to get them to spare their lives, to convince them to spare them. And Ralph of Cayenne said, well, not even money could convince them not to kill them. And they butchered the heathen. They butchered the infidel, the Muslim infidel. And he talks about how they got people and they slit their throats and there was blood everywhere. And it was like ISIS. It was like a Catholic ISIS. And if you imagine if they had internet in those days, imagine if they had cameras in those days. I mean, imagine seeing that in video, right? Anybody with a soul would be disturbed by this. And they did butchery. And the Crusaders, when they entered Jerusalem, they were so sanguinary that they even killed Christians. Yes, they even killed Eastern Christians. Because they look Muslim. Well, they're not Muslim. They're Christian. You just killed them. Well, I mean, they look Muslim to me. They're just a bunch of trigger-happy psychopaths. And the Crusades ended up becoming a forever war. I mean, it was worse than Iraq. The Crusades lasted hundreds of years. Centuries the Crusades lasted. And the Crusades were such a disaster that even Catholics were sick of them. Yeah, they were. And there came a point where the Pope said, we got to go on crusade. And the Christian people just said, life's too short, buddy. Listen, I mean, the average person, the average age of death here is like, what, 40 something? Life is too short. You want us to go to the Middle East to go fight some Muslims over Jerusalem. Why? And the Crusades lasted for hundreds of years, and the Vatican exhausted the Catholic world. In fact, I would argue that, and this was one of the arguments of Martin Luther, I would argue that the Crusades was one of the reasons as to why so many people followed Martin Luther. Martin Luther did a speech saying, look at how many Germans have died fighting for the Vatican. Look at how many Germans have died fighting in the Vatican's wars. And he was right. And so Christendom was exhausted by this thing called the Crusades. And so many people died, tons of people died. And the biggest loss of life in a single battle happened in a battle in Egypt. I'm trying to remember the name. I think it was the Battle of Maimuna. And this battle was led by the King of France. We call him King St. Louis. And St. Louis was the reason why we call him a saint, or one of the reasons why we call him a saint. I don't call him, I mean, there's a city called St. Louis, but the reason why the Catholic Church declared him to be a saint, one of the reasons, was because when the Pope said, hey, we have to go to crusade to liberate Jerusalem, King St. Louis was the only king in Christendom who agreed to go on crusade. The other kings didn't want to do it because, honestly, they were smart. So St. Louis goes to Egypt because, according to his strategy, the Muslims had this big headquarters in Egypt. So he said, if we can defeat the Muslims in Egypt, we could weaken them in Jerusalem, and then thus it would make taking Jerusalem much easier. So he goes to Egypt, and eventually they get into this battle with the Muslims, and the Muslims were armed with blue fire, and when you get hit by blue fire, you can't extinguish it. So the Crusades lost, and tens of thousands of Crusaders lost their lives. And the death count for the Christian side varies depending on the sources that you read, but really the death count was somewhere around 30 or 33,000. It's probably somewhere in between 30 and 33,000 people, around those numbers. It was a lot of freaking people. Tens of thousands of Crusaders were killed, and it was a huge disaster. And what that led to was a massive anti-Crusader movement in France, in Christendom. Now, the anti-Crusader movement was also used for evil. That's a different topic, but it reflected how exhausted people were, how fatigued people were with this idea of crusading. What was the cause of the Crusades? You could say, well, it was persecution against Christians. That was part of it. But also it was this fixation on Jerusalem. It was this idea that because we are the true Israel, we the Christians are the true Israel, then earthly Jerusalem belongs to us. And it was a complete misinterpretation of the Bible, really a complete misconstruing and really butchering of Christianity, because Christianity wants us to focus on heavenly Jerusalem, heavenly Israel, not earthly Jerusalem, which is called Sodom and Egypt by St. John. But it was a fixation on Jerusalem. And so there's a curse, right? There's a curse in all this stuff. And even the Bible speaks of this. In the book of Zechariah, it says, and all those who uplift Jerusalem will be cut to pieces. All those who uplift Jerusalem will be cut to pieces. And that was the reason why the Crusades were a failure. The reason why the Crusades were a failure was because the Crusades were not about Christianity. The Crusades were about a fixation on Jerusalem. It was about really a heretical interpretation of Christianity. And it was ultimately also about power. You know, if you could take Jerusalem, you got a lot of power, religious power, spiritual power. We control the holy city. And you can see this way of thinking when you read medieval literature at the time. I mean, at that time, Crusaders believed that they were the successors of Joshua, and that they were like Joshua taking Jericho from the Canaanites, and the Muslims were Amalek. And in fact, if you look at the Council of Clermont, Pope Urban II says that the Muslims are Amalek. Well, what happens to Amalek in the Bible, right? They're exterminated. So that's the reason why you had all these atrocities. It's because they saw the Muslims as Amalek and heathens, and therefore they had a right to butcher them. And you look at these stories and you think, do you think Jesus would support this? Do you think the carpenter who spoke about loving people and loving humanity and even loving your enemies, you think he would support that? You think he would support atrocities? Really? Obviously not. The Crusades were completely antithetical to Christianity, and I have become completely disillusioned with them. But all this violence, right? Muslim violence in Israel, the Crusades, Jewish violence, all of this insanity, this madness, stems from a fixation on earthly Jerusalem. And it goes back to what God says in the book of Zechariah. All those who uplift Jerusalem will be cut asunder, will be cut to pieces. There's a curse. It leads to war. It leads to violence. It leads to atrocities. Why do Jewish extremists feel like they have the right to slaughter people because those people are not Jewish? It's because they believe we're God's chosen people. Jerusalem belongs to us. This whole land belongs to us. And the Beit HaMikdash, the third temple, is at the center of this entire paradigm. It's at the center of this entire ideology. That is really the root of these atrocities. It's this supremacist way of thinking that has a fixation on Jerusalem. Why do you think evangelicals support Israel so much? It's a fixation on Jerusalem. Jerusalem. I mean, look, you have all these politicians who are going to the Wailing Wall, and they're on the Wailing Wall. They're not even Jews. They're like, I went to the Wailing Wall. Trump did it. All these politicians do it, right? All these sycophants do it. What's this bowing down all the time before the Wailing Wall about? What is that about? I'll tell you what it's about. It's about a fixation on Jerusalem.
And today, Jennifer and I and others had a chance to go see the Western Wall of the Temple Mount, the Western Wall tunnels, so much of the old city. And as you stand there, you can't help but behold the miracle before you. And it got me thinking about another miracle that I hope all of you don't see too far away. Because 1917 was a miracle, 1948 was a miracle, 1967 was a miracle, 2017, the declaration of Jerusalem as the capital was a miracle, and there's no reason why the miracle of the reestablishment of the temple on the Temple Mount is not possible.
And the fact that you have people who are not even Christian doing this sort of thing tells me that there's something supernatural happening here. And by supernatural, I'm not saying it's a good thing. There's something evilly supernatural. I'm not talking about a good supernatural like, I don't know, Elijah riding a fiery chariot. I'm talking by supernatural, I mean like something evil out of the movie The Witch. All right, we're talking that level of supernatural here. Something out of The Witch, something out of the film Hereditary, or maybe perhaps The Exorcist. Right? There's something very evil, metaphysically evil about all this stuff. The fact that you have people who aren't Christian, who aren't religious, and they feel the need to go to Jerusalem. I gotta go to Jerusalem. There's something very demonic here about this. Why did evangelicals, support the Iraq War? I mean, the Iraq War was another disaster. Why did America go to Iraq? Well, you could say, well, it was about weapons of mass destruction. Who was giving us the intelligence saying that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction, right? It was Israel. Israel was doing it. Benjamin Netanyahu pushed for the war. Shimon Peres pushed for the war. Ariel Sharon pushed for the war. Ehud Barak pushed for the war, right? All these Israeli high-level politicians were pushing for the war. And they were effectively saying, Goyim, non-Jew, you guys fight our war. You guys do this. We want you to die for us. You to die for us. And so many evangelicals joined the military. So many Americans joined the military. And if you were to talk to Christians in those days, they would tell you, well, we're gonna help the Middle East. This is for Israel, because Saddam Hussein is an enemy of Israel, and we have to help Israel. And that is why every single evangelical church in America supported the Iraq War. The Catholic Church didn't support the Iraq War because the Catholic Church learned its lesson in the Crusades not to get into forever wars in the Middle East, especially forever wars involving Israel. So the Catholic Church learned the biggest lesson in this. It's a curse, though, right? The fixation on Jerusalem led to our Zionism. It led to American Zionism. That American Zionism led to things like the Iraq War. That led to a forever war in the Middle East. That led to the rise of ISIS. That led to butchery in Iraq. That butchery boiled over into Syria. That butchery ended up being in Syria for over a decade. Tons of people killed. Hundreds of thousands of people killed in Syria because instability in Iraq boiled over into Syria. And it all stems from Zionism. Now, you could say Muslims and all this. Absolutely, yes. But what led to this instability? It was American foreign policy. What was at the root of American foreign policy? It was this pro-Israel lobby that fixates on Jerusalem. It all goes back to this obsession with Jerusalem. Like I said, it's a curse. It's a curse. This is a curse. And people will sit there and say, oh, Israel was founded as this righteous nation. Listen, you can go deep into Israel's modern day history. I'm not talking about the Old Testament. I'm talking about the history of modern day Israel. And you can find atrocities being done by the Jews. Yes, you can find atrocities being done by the Arabs. But the fact was that the Arabs or the Muslims and the Jews went back and forth when it came to atrocities. They went back and forth on atrocities. You had Muslims who did the Hebron massacre in, what was it, 1929? Yes, that happened. But there were Arabs who actually went out of their way to save Jews. So this idea of, well, the Arabs did this, the Arabs did that. Okay, but they were Arabs who saved Jews in the Hebron massacre. What about those people? Do they not get any sort of credit? But no, they want to make everything collectivist. It's just the Arabs. Just hit the Arabs with this big broad brush, make them all out to be evil killers when that's not the case. And they use that way of thinking to promote more fanaticism. And that's why you had the Lehi and the Irgun and these Jewish hardline paramilitary organizations that were existent in British Palestine. And they were doing terrorist attacks on the British, and they massacred Arabs. They don't talk about that, but there's a massacre that you can read about. It's called the Shobaki massacre that happened in 47 or 48. And these fanatics that called themselves Lehi. That's what there was a paramilitary organization called Lehi. It sounds like a Mormon cult, I know, but these Lehi fanatics, they went to this Arab village, and there was a family that in this village called the Shobaki family, and they took 5 members of the Shobaki family and murdered them all in the name of fighting the British. That's a massacre. That's murder. And so what do you expect, right? You're going to get more extremism out of that. Muslims heard that and they said, oh my gosh, these people are going to butcher us. And that was one of the events that led up to the Arab-Jewish civil war in Palestine. So people say, oh, well, Israel was founded on was founded on noble ideas and principles. And the Muslims and the Arabs, they were all just bent on doing atrocities. Muslims did atrocities. Not going to deny that. Hebron massacre. Yes, we're not going to deny that. But so did Jews. They went back and forth. And this blood feud, this Semitic, violent, sectarian blood feud, a lot of it comes down to who's going to control Jerusalem. Who's going to control Jerusalem? It's a curse. And this sectarian violence between Muslims and Jews has been going on for decades. It was going on before Israel was established as a modern day country, before Israel was established as the modern state of Israel. And it's still here. Still going on. You got nearly 900 dead IDF soldiers in this war against Gaza. That's a disaster. I mean, think of how embarrassing that is for Israel. You bombed the shit out of this little strip of land that's about the size of LA. You bombed the shit out of it. You killed at least tens of thousands of people, probably at least 100,000 people or even more. Because they haven't gotten all the bodies underneath the rebels, so it's probably a lot more than tens of thousands. I would say at least 100,000 people have been killed. You bombed the hell out of this place. You made this place into a living hell. And in 20 months of war, the IDF, one of the most advanced, one of the most well-trained militaries on the face of the earth, has lost nearly 900 men. The last time I checked the IDF numbers, the death toll, this is from the IDF, not from Al Jazeera. According to the IDF's own numbers, so far in this war, last I checked, 880 IDF soldiers have been killed. They've been killed fighting this, to be honest with you, underarmed, not very well trained paramilitary organization called Hamas. In 20 months of war. I mean, the Iraq war lasted for a long time. Lasted for a long ass time. And what was it? 3,000 Americans? What was it? 4,000 Americans died in the Iraq war? Israel has already lost close to 1,000 soldiers fighting this war against Hamas. It's an embarrassment. All this bloodshed, all this killing. And then you have the war crimes and the massacres. It's like, when does it end? And then America has gotten itself deep into this war. America has been involved in this war for decades upon decades. You can go all the way back to, who was it? President Johnson or whoever. You can go back a long ass time. Why? Because we have to be pro-Israel. And where does this stem from? If you're a secular Zionist, it stems from Zionism, but still you have an obsession with Jerusalem. You have this obsession with the land, earthly Israel, not spiritual Israel. And if you're a religious American, if you're a Christian American, the reason why you're a Zionist is because your pastor told you to be a Zionist, and your pastor told you, and your parents probably told you that if you weren't pro-Israel, then God was going to curse you. And if you didn't defend Israel no matter what, God was going to curse you. And so that's why. And in your paradigm, in your religious perspective, in your own theological perspective, you have to focus on Jerusalem, because you read that verse that said, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, if I forget thee, may my right hand be cut off. Yeah, Paul talks about spiritual Jerusalem. It's just, it's insanity. It's a curse. It's just a curse. And because of this Zionism, America has had this pro-Israel lobby for decades. And the pro-Israel lobby pushed us to go to war in Iraq. And Israel pushed us to go to war in Iraq. And America thought it was a great idea because America was told, well, it's good for Israel. And Israeli intelligence was telling the Americans, goading the Americans to go to war by telling the Americans that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. And the Israelis propped up this Iraqi scam artist by the name of Ahmed Shalabi, who ended up, by the way, being an agent for the Iranians. And the Israelis propped this guy up as their source for Saddam Hussein having weapons of mass destruction. They said, well, we know for a fact that Saddam Hussein has weapons of mass destruction. Well, how do you know that? Well, our Mossad intelligence has told us so. And by the way, we have this Iraqi scam artist by the name of Ahmed Shalabi, who's wanted by the Jordanian government for stealing money from the Petra Bank. And we believed Ahmed Shalabi. when the entire time Ahmed Shalabi was an agent for the Iranians. And by the way, do you know who else wanted the war in Iraq? It wasn't just the Israelis. The Iranians did. The Iranians wanted the war in Iraq because the Iranians' biggest threat was Saddam Hussein. So the Iranians knew, well, if the Americans can take out Saddam, then we can rise. So the Americans are invading Iraq, and there are the Iranians watching by the sidelines saying, yes, go America. And there are the Israelis saying, yes, go America. Do our war for us. Do the war that we want to do. And what happened? You had the rise of Iran, and you had a scared shitless Israel. And because of Israel's goading of the United States to go to war in Iraq, Israel has been shitting its pants since the early 2000s because of the rise of Iran. That was the result of America taking out Saddam, and that was the result of America following the propaganda, following the false intelligence of Israel, and following this very destructive policy making of the pro-Israel lobby. It's a curse. The whole damn thing is a curse. And it's such a curse that we are seeing atrocities being done in Gaza. We have Christians saying that these atrocities aren't happening because they have to defend Israel no matter what, because Israel is their God. And we have Israelis who are disturbed by all of this, because Israel has become so evil and so filled with madness that you even have Israelis who are disturbed by Israel. Anyway, you guys just heard some theology. God bless.